it, inshallah. It's very small chapter, and we can cover it just like within 45 minutes, inshallah. And after that, we will discuss the TMA questions, and then you are free, inshallah. Okay. Okay. So, students, you can see the screen, right? Thank you. Okay, so today, inshallah, we're going to talk about exception handling in C Sharp. In this, we are going to talk about how we can handle runtime error. Basically, in C Sharp or in any programming language, there arises broadly like two kinds of errors. One, we call it as a syntax error or compile time error, which is basically an error that a system or the compiler detects before we execute the program. For an example, if we are using a variable without its declaration. In the sense here, for example, let me say here that I'm gonna say int a is equal to 10, and then I'll say int b is equal to 20, and I'll say then uh, sum is equal to a plus b, and I'm gonna write console dot write line. The sum is now here we see that there is some red marks over here which says the name sum does not exist in the current context. Fine. And when we try to run this program, we may stuck up with this error with the sum, right? That sum is not defined here. So there will be a build error, and we would like to continue to run the last successful build. And there is building this program or compiling this program to convert into an executable file so that the program will execute and we'll see the output. There is an error here. And now what is that error is that we did not define the sum variable, right? The sum does not exist. This is an error. Okay. Such errors, we call it as an syntax error or compile time error. Okay. And sometimes we write some function names, or let's say that we write some methods names which is not correct. In this sense, I'm writing here that write line, okay, with L small. Fine, welcome. Now this again an error. We can see that there is no method write line with a small l for the word line. Okay, this is again a compile time error, or we can say a syntax error. Fine, you can see a list of errors over here that the sum does not exist, and in line number 100 sum does not exist in line number 101, and there is no write line method in 103, line number 103. So such type of errors we call them as an syntax errors. Fine. So basically we find this one type, which is what we call it as a syntax error. The other type of error is what is called the runtime errors, which is also called exceptions. Now these runtime errors arises when at the time of running the program, when the program is executing, that it will not define any error when at the time of compiling a program, you don't see such kind of red line marks over here in Visual Studio, fine, and you don't see errors, okay, list over there for such type of error. Fine. Those are called the runtime errors, and these are called exceptions. So we have a way that if there exists any or there comes any exception during running of the program, we can handle those exceptions. We can handle those errors in a way that we can take those errors and display a proper message, or take a proper action, that what to do if such error comes when the program is running. Okay, so this chapter is about exception handling, that how we can deal with such errors. Right. So we're going to talk here. The objectives of this chapter is explain the debugging, differentiate between compile time error and runtime error, and exception handling in C# using try catch, and finally blocks. So in introduction here is that I just explain you regarding that the errors, how the system, the errors are being identified, right, as in compile time error, or in syntax error, and error that is identified during the running of the program, which is called the exceptions or runtime errors. Okay, now these mistakes, which are a compile time mistakes, is very simple and easy to identify, and it will not harm the system because it will be identified before the program is executed, those compile time errors. Fine. So that simply it takes that the programmer to check for these errors, okay, before the execution, and correct those errors and go ahead with running of the program. But in sometimes the program, when it goes into the runtime error, these runtime errors sometimes lead to the system crash or lead to some incorrect outputs. Fine. So there should be a way that we can deal with such kind of error. Okay. Now in this case, we have something called debugging, which is a process of identifying and fixing errors in a software program to ensure that it behaves as in the intended manner. That for what purpose we have designed this program, it behave to give us that purpose and give us that particular output, or the results. Okay, so in that case, if there is an error, identifying those errors and fixing those errors is nothing but debugging. So in software development domain, such errors are commonly referred as bugs, and there are a number of debugging tools or debuggers that can be used for tracing down the errors in an exact piece of code, fine, to identify the errors and to correct the errors so that the software work as it is intended. Most of the IDEs are equipped with such built-in debuggers that holds the programmer fix the bug during the development. One of these is Visual Studio. We can see in the Visual Studio that there is some marks, the lines which is given over here, the red lines and all, helping us to identify these errors and to correct them so that we can make correction to them, and we can run the program safely, and we can get the output, okay, as intended. Right. So Visual Studio is an IDE that support that provides a feature of debugging to identify any errors. So the use of debuggers ensure the systematic approach to problem or error resolution, and it involves a number of commonly performed activities such as starting, pausing, and stopping, restarting the program, and all. So we have here, for example, when we run the program, fine, we have here debugging that help us in many of these tasks. We can start debugging, right? At some particular point, we can start, stop the debugging. We have a step into, a step over, going line by line, making breakpoints to perform some, to check if there is any errors and so on. Okay, even we can stop the program in between. Okay, so that is what is called debugging process, where the debuggers or the tools, debugging tools, help us to identify the errors and fix the errors so that the program runs exactly as is it is intended to work. Now, the errors, as I said, like two type of errors, which is a compile time error and a runtime error. A compile time error is all a syntax error which is detected and displayed to show that there is a mistake here in some line that you need to identify. Fine. So it is just display an error and it will not create the CS file, that is an executable file uh, for the assembly file for execution. Okay, it will not create, it will just show you these are the syntax errors. For example, missing variable names, writing the names of the function, improper name of the function. Okay, misusing some operators. So such kind of errors will be under runtime, sorry, compile time errors. Moving ahead, we have something called runtime errors, which is the executable file is generated. It is, the file is executed, but during the running of the program stops, right, and gives us some indication or errors that the program is stopped, or that interrupted, and it is being stopped due to some errors. Fine. Now, such errors will not be identified by the debugger. It is during the runtime they come up. Such errors, for example, it is like dividing an integer by zero, right? Now, if you divide any number by zero, what is the value? You all know that, right? For example, 10 divided by zero is how much? What is the result of this? Is it 0 or 1 or 10? Sorry? Oh, I cannot hear it clearly.
It's error, cannot be divided by 0.
Yeah, we cannot divide any number by 0. It is what we call it as an infinity. Fine. Any number division by 0 is infinity, or it is an error. Fine. So if something happens in your program during the running of the program, in between that, some calculations you were doing right in between, and you find that the equation came up in such a way that there is a division by 0. Fine. In this case, the compiler will not identify during the debugging process. Right. During the execution, such error comes up, and it will stop the program without informing and just saying that, or it will interrupt the program completely. Fine. So in that case, we don't know what happened. Fine. And something happened inside the program that disturbed the whole program. Fine. Such error, we call it as a runtime error. Also, for example, if we are trying to access an element out of the bounds of an array, for example, let's say we declare an array of size 5, array A of size 5. Now we are trying to access array 6, index 6, right? We declare a size 5, we're trying to access index 6, which does not exist, right? This is also an error, that we are trying to access an element which does not exist. Is an error. Also, for example, trying to store a value into an array of an incompatible class. You declare an integer array and you are trying to store a string value in it, is again a runtime error. Passing parameter that is not in the valid range or value, that is, you are trying to pass parameters which is not of a similar type to the method. No, these kind of error, we call it as in runtime errors or exceptions. Okay, so attempting to use a negative size of an array is again an exception. Using a null object reference as a legitimate object reference, exception or runtime error. Converting invalid string to a number or vice versa. Then, for example, I want to convert a string ABC, right? And I say convert dot to int, convert dot to int 35 or sorry 32 ABC. ABC is not an integer value, right? So trying to convert a string into a number is again uh, an error. Of course, if it is 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3 can be converted into integer, but what about ABC cannot be converted into integers. Similarly, accessing character that is out of the bound of the string. When errors are encountered, csop typically generates an error message and aborts the program. It stops the program. Fine. So with Visual Studio IDE, sorry, we have some kind of help in that case, but it is again an exception. So let's try this. For example, let's say that I have int c is equal to uh, let's say that I'll say b minus a plus 10 divided by sorry b, let's say b plus a divided by uh, b minus a, and let me be as 10. Now here the equation is okay. C is equal to b plus a divides by b minus a. B plus a will be 20, b minus a will be 0. Now here comes the division by 0. You don't see any compile time error, you don't see any red mark here to show that there is any mistake because it is not a compile time error. The equation is fine. But during the running of the program, this problem appears of what is called division by 0, right? So we'll just put a statement here. Value of C is 0. Let's see. It's just a statement, but this statement does not come because this program stops here. Fine, you can check that. So now here we see that the program is stopped here. Fine. And exception unhandled, system divide by 0 exception, attempt to divide by 0. The program stops here. Fine. We don't find any output there. The program goes stop here. Okay. And the output screen is empty. We don't have anything in the output screen. It's not working. Right? Why? Because the program has stopped here and there is an exception which is division by 0. Fine. So this is what we call it as a runtime error or an exception. Anything before this, for example, let me say console dot write line of a is equal to 0, comma b is equal to 1, a comma b. Fine. So now we'll see that the AB, now we have an exception that we see the output screen A and B has been printed, and then after that the exception comes where the program did stop and did not continue working, right? So we're just gonna stop here, right? We cannot do anything at this point. We're gonna stop the program and we see that the program has been stopped. Okay, it has been exit now because of the division by 0. Fine. So which is what we call it as a runtime error. Okay, now how we can handle these runtime error, that what we have seen an exception here, right? Division by 0 an exception. Okay, so these in C sharp and also in Java, I think if you have studied Java programming, M250 sorry M251, you have learned about exception. So exception is a condition that caused by runtime error in the program. While the C# compiler encounters such errors like division by zero, it creates an exception object and throw that exception object. If the exception object is not caught and handled properly, the compiler will display an error message and will terminate the program. This is what is happening here, right? We are not catching any exception. We are not dealing with anything. The program stops here, right, and says there is an exception here, division by zero exception, which is attempt to divide by zero, and the output screen is the first line what we have seen. The program stops here. That means there is an exception generated here, okay, and this exception, you can see the details of these exception. Click on these detail, you can see the details of this exception. I think it will take to the any website to show that. And here is an exceptions. Yeah, what is the message? Attempt to divide by zero message, fine. And it is an exception but that occurred in this program, fine. So here how an object is generated, which is this an exception object, okay, and it says exception unhandled. So we have a process here, or we have a technique that we can handle these exceptions, okay, so that the program will not terminate, right, like this what we have seen. The program can be terminated properly. In the sense, for example, if you take the calculator and a system calculator we have, let's say, for example, I'll just no, in this calculator, if I try to do division by zero, what happens? For example, 2 divided by 0. Now we have a proper message. The calculator still exists with a proper message that cannot divide by 0. Right? Calculator does not stop here, or there is no error or any problem in running of this calculator program. It's working fine, but it is giving us a proper message that what is happened, and you can continue this using this calculator after clearing this message, right? So I'll just clear this message that is happened. So I'll go ahead what division I have to do, or in the sense I'll just show you this again. 2 divided by 0, proper message. You can continue the calculator. Similarly, our program, we can make such thing that we can handle this exception and display a proper message and continue our program. Continue our program, which is called exception handling. Which is called exception handling. So it is, what is the process is that find the problem, that is hit the exception, inform that an error is occurred, that is throw an exception, receive that error information, catch the exception, take corrective action, which is called handle the exception. Fine, 4 step. Fine. So how it happens, the basic concept of exception handling, or throwing an exception and catching an exception. So we're gonna write any code that we feel can generate an exception. We're gonna put in a block called a try block. So we'll make a try block. In a try block, we are gonna put the statements or the codes where an exception can occur. Fine. And right after that, we need to have some catch block. If an exception generated, the exception will be thrown, and the catch block is going to catch that exception, take the proper action, and then after that it continue the execution. Fine. So in the sense, we need to have a try block, then a catch statement, then we can continue our program. Fine. So in our program, for example, over here, okay, we feel that there can be a exception here in this code. Okay, so we're gonna take this, put this code inside this try block. Okay, and we're gonna write a catch block here. Catch block where we are going to take a proper action. For example, a message that division by zero occur, division by zero occur, or whatever the message. For example, division by zero is not allowed, cannot divide a number by zero, anything, any such thing. Okay, and then we can continue with our work. Okay, let me define C here so that we can display the C at the end. What is the value of C? Fine. C is 0, but we are trying to do some exception here, that is an equation. As C is equal to B plus A, then B minus A, and then if there is any exception will be caught here, and we'll continue the program. So in this case, we don't find that the program stops in between. Okay, so let us just run this program and make sure that it's working. Fine. Now you see that output screen, we have A, B, and we say that there is division by zero occur, and the value of C is 0. Right? Now, if you look at this, AB is displayed here, then it comes here in the try block, exception occurs, which is thrown. Here it is an hit the exception. Then the exception is thrown. The catch will catch that is the exception. Okay, and the action what we have taken is just to display a message, just to display a message. Or we can take some other action. Let's say, for example, we just say C is equal to B plus A divided by 2. In case if there is an exception, divide the C. C will be B plus A divided by 2. Fine. So if happens, we'll do this action and we'll just display the value of C. Okay. Now we can see here that there is an exception occur. So C is B plus A, which is 20 by 2, 10. So it is here, the exception is hitting an exception here. Fine. An exception is thrown out of the try block. The next catch or the matching catch will take that exception, take the action what to be done, and then after that continue the execution of the program, and the program terminates normally. Fine. So this is what we call it as an exception handling. Fine. Now we can have multiple catch statement for a try block because there can be a number of exceptions generated. It is not always division by zero. There can be division by zero, index out of bound, okay, index out of range, or if there is any memory error, any different type of exception can occur, right? So for example, if you look into this program, we have 3 catch statements here. We have arithmetic exception. So if there is any problem with the arithmetics, with the operators and all, arithmetic exception, which is division by zero, for example. We have index out of range exception, which means if we are trying to access an index of the array, which is not there. Here, what is the index 0, 1? We are saying A2, which is wrong, right? So this throws what kind of exception? Index out of range exception. So it comes here to the index out of range exception and display the message array index error. Okay. We also have array type mismatch exception. This is another kind of exception. Okay. If we are trying to assign to the array some wrong data, right? It's an integer array. We're trying to assign some wrong data. So it is an exception. Okay, now different type of catch. So we can see that for a try we can have a number of catch. It is not only one catch, two catch. We can have a number of catch with different type of exceptions. If we are expecting different type of exceptions can occur in this block, then we can include different type of. So the matching catch will be considered. So in this case, we are trying to access this a of 2, which is not there, right? So it is index and out of bound exception, right? So we can have a multiple catches statement for a single try block. So that's an try catch statement and how we can handle the exceptions in C#. Finally, here it is, we have a statement called finally block or finally statement. This finally block is a block which is executed at the end of the program, right? So C# support another statement called finally statement that can be used to handle an exception that is not caught by any of the previous catch statement. In the sense, if we write catch statements which is not matching with the exception which has been generated, so in that case, the finally block is taken. The finally block can be used to handle exception generated within a try block. It may be added immediately after a try block or after the catch blocks. When a finally block is defined, the program is guaranteed to execute regardless of how control leaves the try, whether it is due to normal termination or due to an exception occur or due to a jump statement. As a result, we can use it to perform certain housekeeping operations such as closing file, releasing system resources, destroying the objects and all. Right. So finally is at the end will be executed in at the end of the program, and we can keep the finally in case like if there is no catch with the try, we can keep the finally. If there is no catch matching with the exception generated, finally can be executed, and we can keep the finally block or a finally statement to release the files, to release the resources which has been used, right, to destroy the objects, release the system memory and all. Fine, so we can include the finally block as if like a catch with the try block. Fine. So this is all what we have here for you in exception handling. So overall what we have seen in this small topic is that what is debugging, two types of error, compile time error, runtime error, what is an exception, how the C# handle the exception in 4 statements, that is hit an exception, throw an exception, catch an exception, take an action, which is by using a try catch statement. One try can have multiple catch, and we can add a finally block at the end of the try or catch. Right. So this is all you have here in this topic. If you have any questions, please go ahead before we move to the next discussion. Any questions? Okay, thank you. Fine. So it's all done. Okay, one of the student is asking about something to discuss in the TMA. We have some question, he said.
Yes, it's me.
Yes, mister. Please go ahead.
Can you open the file of the string, the TMA?
Which file?
The TMA, the question one in the LMS.
The question file, you mean?
Yes, yes.
Okay. I had that file. I don't know where I kept it. Let me see it here. What you want to know in this one? Is there any specific question?
question number one, part one, and